Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the IJB Audit Committee. It is my role at this meeting to welcome you all, and having regard to the decision of the IJB to reappoint this Audit Committee, there is a requirement to appoint a chair, and I would invite nominations for the chair. Catherine?
I nominate Councillor Julie Bell.
Is there a seconder for that nomination?
Yeah, I would
like to second that nomination.
Two Peters have seconded it.
Thank you. Are there any other nominations? In the absence of nomination, any other nomination, I would simply record that Councillor Bell has been appointed to the chair of the Integration Joint Board Audit Committee, and would ask her to take the chair. And the next order of business is to appoint a vice chair.
Thank you, David, and thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure to be back. If there are no other nominations to nominate Andrew Jack.
I would second that.
Are you happy to accept that nomination, Andrew? Excellent. That seems to be us sorted then. Thank you very much indeed. And welcome to today's Audit Committee. And as usual, I would just very much like to thank all our people for not just being here today, but for all that everyone is doing, not just on the back of COVID, but on the back of Storm Arwen last week and Barra last night. These are challenging times, I think it's fair to say, and we're just getting started on winter, so my gratitude to everyone across our services. And if we can move on to the agenda, please, could we have any apologies?
Chair, no apologies intimated. I noted Hayley Mearns, but early discussion, so she's here.
Oh, right,
Hayley,
okay.
Sorry, I thought you were apologising, Hayley, because of last night, but clearly everything's okay.
I'm still awaiting results, Gail, but I'm here and I'm feeling fine, so that's the main thing.
Excellent news. Thanks for any declarations of interest. My standing one as a non-exec director of Public Health Scotland, it's non-financial, and it allows me, there's an exemption to stay in and vote. Anyone else? Nope. Shaking heads. That's marvellous. Thank you very much. And if we can move on to the minutes, which is agenda item 4A. I just have something, Karen, and I really apologise for missing this when you sent the draft minutes out on page 7, the second paragraph, which is a single sentence at the top of that page. On the second line of that, could we add after the and, add in relation to personal protective equipment, and I think that just completes the sentence a bit more roundly. Is that all right? Thank you. Does anyone else have any comments on the minutes, and can we then approve them, please? Yep. Okay, thank you very much. And then if we move on to agenda item 4B, onto the action log, is it Sandy that's going to take us through that, please?
Yeah, thanks, Chair.
Thanks.
Yes. So yeah, our usual update on actions that have fallen out of previous minutes. I'll say it now, but it's pertinent to some other reports, and we'll maybe pick it up later on in the agenda. We have got a number of actions in various places that are red, are behind schedule, and that's explained, I say it elsewhere in papers, but is often to do with either complexity, but very often complexity and capacity. What we can see here is a number of the more recent actions have gone green. They're picked up in papers today, and there is an item at the bottom of page 9, which is worth highlighting. It's something the Audit Committee have had their eye on for quite some time, and we've talked about it in other papers, and it's in some of the other audit recommendations. As of the 1st of November, Angus Council has agreed to devolve the the oversight of the finance management team who've worked on adult social care to the IJB's Chief Finance Officer, which is me. But that also now helpfully matches the arrangements we already have in place with the NHS side. So that from a professional perspective, and I hope eventually for the IJB, it is a big step forward for us and for anybody who picks up this role in future years. It is a good thing. There are one or two issues about staffing, but I'll mention that later on. But Julie, that's the main point I want to make. We're struggling with some of the actions in terms of capacity, but some of the current ones are still moving on.
Okay, thanks very much, Sandy, and thanks for rightly highlighting that particular item, which has been on our agenda for some considerable time now. Does anyone have any questions for Sandy around the action log? I think it's fair to say we're seeing slippage in a number of different committees and reports across the system, and understandably so. I think, as I mentioned earlier, everyone's really stretched, and we are aware. So no questions from anyone. I'm not seeing. Oh, it's Catherine. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bell. It was just on page 10, item 7, in relation to induction and development sessions. I'm just conscious that next year there are local government elections, and that may or may not result in some turnover of IJB membership. So it was just really to flag that as a point in time, that it would certainly be helpful if we could do something before then, because an induction for those individuals will be mandatory as part of their refreshed kind of induction or new induction process. So I'm not sure whether there's something that we can do across the country around that. Other places presumably also have induction issues, and maybe there's a collaboration that would be helpful there. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. I think, well, I know I certainly have access to the improvement service development opportunities, and these have been excellent on the whole. I just wondered if those are also available to IJB members. Does anyone also receive those? Not seeing any recognition around that. I just wonder if that might be something that we can explore. Tony has his hand up there.
And forgive me if I'm repeating myself, I'm just getting old now. So I may have said this before, but there are resources available. I do remember sharing them with Berry, but it might have been Paige and it might have been Sandy. But there is, and I remember sorting it out. So there is the tourist, which is for NHS staff, but they deliberately made access available to local authority members as well. And it's guidance for audit committee members. So if you're talking about specific audit committee induction, then there is something. And I'll put my hand up because so I should declare an interest because I was involved in writing the one on audit committees and the finance one. But notwithstanding that, they've gone down quite well across the piece. So there is, if you want specific audit committee induction, which is slightly health geared, but still there's a lot of good stuff in there about risk and all that type of thing, and assurance and the questions and how do we know stuff. So that is a useful resource, and I'll quite happily send that to Sandy. I think it must have been the other, because there's two Berries. Dave Berry's the finance officer for Dundee, and being slightly old now, I tend to get confused between them. But I will send Sandy the link, and I can't remember the details, but there's definitely a way for local authority people to use that as well as health people. So that might be helpful.
Okay, that's great, Tony. Thank you. Peter Davidson.
Certainly, just to support what Tony said, I obviously joined the NHS Tayside Board in April, and I've been working my way through tourists. I found it particularly helpful with active governance, and because I sit on the Audit and Risk Committee of NHS Tayside, the workshops available online in relation to audit and risk are really good. So I would encourage everyone to see if that's a possibility for them.
Absolutely, great. Thank you very much. That's really helpful. Anyone else? Sandy, you okay with that? Yeah.
Yeah, I think, we'll take 3 actions there. First of all, Catherine, noting your point about the timing of the induction, that was for the overall IJB, that particular action point, and I think that's what you're making your point. So absolutely, we'll do that. Julie, we'll look into the improvement service resource and follow that one up. And kind of noting Peter's feedback, Tony, certainly if you ping that to us, links onto me or the resource onto me, we can look at sharing the audit committee related points with the audit committee members.
That's great. Thank you very much indeed. And if that completes the questions around the action plan, we can note them and move on to item 5, which is the 21-22 internal audit plan progress report by Tony. Thank you, Tony.
Thank you, Chair. Right, as you can see, we're getting on with the work, and there's no actual reports to take at this stage, but the governance assurance, we've been doing quite a bit of work with Paul Vivian Davidson, got the benefit of my voluminous comments on the integration scheme, which I'm sure she was grateful for, because I believe there's been quite a few comments from all sorts of folks. So how she reconciles all those, I don't know, but that piece of work's been done. And we've been discussing various things with Sandy in terms of governance and keeping on top of that. And there was, of course, the risk presentation I did, which some of you may remember with horror, but I don't remind you of that. But that was another piece of work we've done. So we've been keeping on top of that. The primary care one, I think December was frankly ambitious, given the scope of that. But we're getting on with that, and that's been very interesting. That's a joint piece of work between the Health Board and the Council, and obviously involving the other IJBs as well, because Angus is the lead body for that particular aspect, which is an enormously, as you know, complicated risk. And actually asking a simple question like, what is primary care? Doesn't give you as simple as an answer as you might expect. So we are very much moving forward with that one. Bluntly, I think it's my fault that December was a wee bit ambitious, given the complexity of the thing, and making sure that we keep everyone involved, because it's complex and because we have this hosted service thing, and you have people from the Health Board, you have people from the 3 IJBs and Angus having the lead. That's been slightly more complicated than perhaps we'd anticipated, although you could argue we should have done. But we're getting on with that, and that will definitely be out in April, and I hope it will provide some real benefit, particularly in terms of looking at the assurances we get across the piece of primary care, and not just on the primary care improvement plan, which is generally focused on GPs, practitioners, the whole range of services, and making sure that you get what you need as the lead agency, the Health Board gets what it needs, and the other IJBs get what they need in terms of assurance, notwithstanding the fact that that is a particularly complex and difficult risk to manage. So it's not going to be the case that we're going to come up with any magic pills to sort that risk. We can at least make sure that everyone understands it properly and understands what's being done, and whether those things are being effective and are likely to be effective. So that's a focus of that. On the other one, and I know there was a real hope that we would get this commission services one to you, because it's a key audit, but for the reasons explained there, that's one that's being done by Angus Council colleagues, who do provide a very good service. But they discovered a conflict of interest, which can happen to the best of us. So the people that had lined up to do it can't. And then there's been issues within the client, if you like, in terms of the offices we would liaise with they're understaffed, and I suppose it's the same everywhere as the pressures that Councillor Bell was talking about. But that is still on track, and to be fair, Angus Council colleagues have a very good track record on this. If they say they'll deliver something, they do, which is great from my point of view and from yours. So yeah, we'd have liked it to hear, but that's the way. That's the way it goes sometimes. Sorry, I've got various messages bringing in, but yes, that's the progress report. So we are. There's a couple of bits slightly later than we would have liked, but they will definitely be ready for April 22. And I think those are going to be really quite powerful pieces of work. And we're getting on with the governance stuff. And when I get the next iteration of the integration scheme, I'm sure I'll be commenting on that again, much to Vivian's delight. And there's also, just to be clear, there's probably a little bit more work I'll be doing with Gail on the risk stuff as well. So there's plenty of activity. You'll get your assurances by year end. If there's any questions that anyone has, I'll be more than happy to answer them.
Thanks, Tony. And I think this committee did recognise the ambitious nature of the proposed target dates particularly for the primary care audit when it was first put on the plan. So yeah, totally appreciate the issues going on there. Does anyone have any questions for Tony on that update report? Nope, I'm seeing shaking head. Oh, Sandy.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, Tony, just about those changes in timelines for those two reports at the bottom. Because we only meet so many times a year, a shift from December to April is obviously quite a change. Is there any likelihood that those reports will be available to share with members of the Audit Committee before the April meeting, in any format?
Yeah, I can't. It looked to me like the council one, I don't have the direct involvement. I can ask Catherine and make sure something comes out with the minutes. For the primary care one, yeah, I'd hope. January might be ambitious, just knowing what else is happening in the range of stuff, but plus clearing that report is going to be complex because of the complexities of the audit. I can just tell that clearing it's going to take us to some interesting places, and but yes, definitely before April the primary care one will be out, and as soon as the other one's out, then we'll get that going, and I'll pass that on to Catherine as a comment. So yeah, we'll get those.
Okay, particularly keen to see that, as the April one would be my last audit committee as chair. So thanks. Gail's hands up.
Yeah, Tony, it's fair to say that Judith Treeps has been trying to progress that, and that it is fairly complicated. I know she's certainly been in touch with me about definitions, etc. So they are trying, Tony. It's not that she's not doing anything there.
Oh no, at the moment she's that work has paused. I know that because we're doing what we call the ICE. So for those of you that are lucky enough to be Health Board Audit Committee members as well, you can look forward to that in January. So that's kind of a big internal control evaluation, and that of course provides assurance to you because that's shared with you as an audit committee later on, and gives you assurance around the totality, in fact, of the Health Board's activities. But yeah, I know that the primary care stuff's paused, but that's not too bad a thing because I think there was quite a lot of information she was asking for, and some of it was coming back quicker than others, and some of it was highlighting some interesting aspects of the what you could call a diffuse assurance environment if you were getting technical, and you might less technically describe it as an awful lot of fingers in the pie. So that probably hasn't done any harm because it'll allow all that information to come in, and it has been coming in at different paces. I'm sure, Gail, you would have responded quickly, but others I know have not been quite as diligent. But it will allow us to get all of that on track before we start back up again, probably January now. That's very start, first job in January.
Gail, you coming back in on that?
Yes, there was to have been a risk management committee tomorrow, Tony, where Gail McClure was going to do the update on sustainability of primary care on that risk, but the meeting's been stood down, cancelled tomorrow.
Sorry, is that a Tayside one or a...
Tayside.
Yeah.
Okay, right, thanks very much.
Thank you, Gail.
We're being asked to note Tony's report there, so we're happy to do that and move on to item 6, which is the internal audit report's follow-up actions from Sandy.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Again, this is a regular report that we bring together, clearly setting out where we are with actions that fall out of previous internal audit reports. So I'll just highlight a few points. Bullet point 2.5 We're just giving you an update about where we are with the quite involved charging for services audit that we saw earlier on in this calendar year. Some of you may remember that was quite an involved report with a number of recommendations. So the first bit of that work is actually, in terms of getting things up and running, in terms of developing a response, has gone okay. We're now, I think maybe next week, we've got a follow-up meeting to see where individual working groups are getting to. I'm a bit concerned about our capacity to draw things back together. As we look at the improvement actions and moving towards an approval and an implementation phase. So I think we just need to keep an eye on that. Catherine, just out of interest, that's something I've had a very short chat with Ian Lorimer, Angus Council's Director of Finance, about, because we all have a stake in this, and we're just going to keep an eye on where we are with that one. Another point to note is item 2.7. Members of this committee have previously, and I'm grateful for this, have previously expressed a willingness to help support us unlock and unblock some of the actions. I have looked at most of the things here, and I don't think there's anything we particularly need to escalate to the committee in terms of helping us solve things, but we'll keep that bullet point on there in case there's things like that in future. And finally, the point to note, I've mentioned this already, at 3.1, we just highlight that there are capacity issues, and this pops up in a number of the reports. And I think one of the problems is that as lots of parts of the system have capacity issues, for solving complicated issues, you need more than one part of the system to be able to work at the same time in conjunction with other people. And having the capacity available concurrently in a number of different places is one of those things that is just proving a wee bit difficult at the moment. So you'll see that, I mentioned it earlier on, you'll see that pop through as a bit of a theme. But otherwise, Chair, I'm happy to take any questions on where we are.
Okay, thank you. And I think the whole committee will be very open to any conversations around, when we need to escalate things or to reprioritise workload to support you and your team around what is covered off, because we do know that we've got challenging times to deal with. So Peter Burke first, and then Andrew Jack, please.
Yeah. Thanks, Julie. Thanks for that, Sandy. That's a good report, as usual. One thing that sort of gives me a little twinge of concern is if we look at, for example, the next page, AN 05/20, item 3, that's a significant item. And we've had overdue good progress for a couple of months. I'm wondering whether it's possible, it might not be given the complexity, but whether it's possible to put some sort of anticipated date rather than hope to bring it to an audit committee some point in the next year or so. Because these, overdue good progress, all these big projects slip one day at a time, and then you end up with them 2 years late or longer. So it would be really good to try and put some sort of stakes in the ground to say, we hope to have it by then. And if we don't get it by then, it's because of whatever.
Okay, Peter, first of all, that issue in various descriptions has been around for a good period of time. And this is Peter, you and others have flagged this issue before about when do we think we're going to get them? Sorry, I paraphrased what you said. You said it much more politely than I said it. But anyway, that is kind of the gist. How soon will we be able to get to this? And I think I suppose if I was writing this report 2 weeks ago and you said, Sandy, can you put in when will this happen? I'd have said, flipping heck, I honestly am not sure. And that's because the things like the capacity issues and the complexity of dealing with capacity issues, it's really quite hard to be clear about when these will gradually resolve themselves in various parts of the system. So I suppose my inclination when writing was not to address that point head on, probably because I honestly didn't know when that would come to pass. But what I can do, Peter, and probably helpful if Karen does kind of minute this, is we will, in putting together the status updates, which is the right-hand column in there, we will try and be a bit more specific about the likelihood of the dependencies and when these things will eventually get across the finishing line. So I do completely take the point on board, but answering it is often proved difficult at the point of writing a paper.
Okay. The only other point, if we scoot down to the next page, you seem to have run out of coloured ink because status things are not coloured at all, and that would just be very helpful to have more reds and greens and whatever.
Yeah, those actions, again, I was conscious a number of those actions had December endpoints. And again, when I was writing the report in probably the last part of November, I felt a bit bad about reading them out, a good 30 odd days before the end of December. But I have kind of consciously left them as not coloured because it was just so hard with timelines moving quite quickly in terms of maybe reaching the end of December. I maybe should have said that in the covering report. That's why I've consciously not put a colour against those, because we hadn't reached the timelines. But I was still quite a long way away from the 31st of December when I was writing the report.
Okay.
Thank you. And Andrew. And then Tony.
I know it's the right place to bring it up, but it's maybe connected with item 2.3, in which there seems to be a missing word anyway. A risk management strategic something. You got it. Well, my question is about, we had a risk appetites meeting, development session, and I'm kind of unsure about what the outcome of that was. I think we learned a bit about risk appetite, but I'm not sure that I have a feeling about how much risk appetite the IJB has at this moment in time. I don't think I could put a number on it. Is that work in progress, like a number of follow-up actions? Is it included in that? I don't get a feeling there was anything concrete came out of that. But obviously there was, but I can't find it.
Sandy, do you want to come in and answer that?
Yeah, well, yeah, Andrew, you're completely right. That was one of those things that we agreed after we had those meetings in June. The point is referenced on page 18 of the papers. And that's probably where we are right now, actually. Page 18 of the papers. It's the second item down there, reference number 3, and we are still working on the risk appetite is to be subsequently developed. So we have got that down. We were making progress on that. We have done some work on that, but we haven't managed to get that across the line in terms of completing that. But that's where we've jotted that point down there, Andrew.
And is there going to be a follow-up session to advise us how much appetite we've got?
My understanding is that we'll see that incorporated into papers, but I don't know if Tony was wanting to come in on that particular issue, but Gail looks like she's wanting to come in on that particular issue, so Gail, crack on.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask Tony, you're quite right, Andrew, we still have to establish our risk appetite for the IJB. I am aware my colleagues in Dundee have also had a development session as well, but Tony, I'm not sure that they confirmed the risk appetite either. I met with the Tayside Risk Management Group, the Tayside-wide group chaired by Dave Berry last month, but I don't think they've confirmed the risk appetite either. Do you know more, Tony?
I must admit, I'm trying to the exact precision of it. I remember for Angus, what we said was that it was going to be a very simple risk appetite at first, and that the key thing, kind of the exhortation to members, was really to think about what it means. So to notice there was a period of reflection required. Genuinely, this isn't, to say delay. What you need to do is think about what it means. Look at the papers. So the exhortation to everyone was to say, well, okay, when I'm getting a decision paper, when I'm getting an assurance paper, when I'm being told what's going on, when I'm being told what's not going on, am I able to disentangle that in a way that allows me to understand what our tolerance level is and what happens when we're not within that? And primary care would be a good example. Whatever tolerance level you choose to pick, it's not going to be the one you currently got with primary care. That then allows you to start to say, well, okay, what do we do about that? We might have enhanced monitoring. Can you actually do anything about that? If we are going to do about it and it takes investment, what are we going to not do? Where are we going to give? And that period of reflection is required to have a genuine risk appetite, one that means something. I mean, anyone can, and I won't name names, but I've got clients who have done a risk appetite that literally we've gone around and asked people and no one understands what it means. So the important thing is that period of reflection. So you're in that period of reflection at the moment. And I know behind the scenes, Gail's office has been in contact. I'm certainly, there will be a process, and there were some questions that came back, and I've agreed to do the analysis of those and do it. Then I have to stop, because as Chief Internal Auditor, I can't audit something I've done. And it's right that you take ownership, and I know Gail wants to. So I've agreed to do that preliminary analysis behind the scenes. But then at that point, I have to stop, otherwise I'm marking my own homework, which would be a terrible thing. So that's where we are with that one. But we are at the moment in that period of reflection, where you as members are noticing what's above, what's below, what you feel comfortable with, in order to allow you to have a much more structured and better discussion at the point where you land on a risk appetite. And you've been in that process for a wee bit. So that should be, I think, coming up soon. And I know that started, but I'd also know that, at the moment, because of the risk environment, that winter is coming thing, there are times when you actually have to say, do you know what, we're going to apply risk appetite to the situation on the ground and worry about the theory afterwards, and that's fine. I did have another question, but maybe we'll let this one play out and I'll come back on that later.
I have a follow-up on that one, Chair, if that's possible. Just to follow up on what Tony was saying, is that okay? Yes, no?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, Tony, I totally agree. I think that's exactly, you've summed it up. We're in a period of self-reflection. My question is there, once we've finished all this internal personal reflection, we should get together as an IJB and share these reflections and come up with a combined appetite, because otherwise we're all going to have different risk appetites. Is that the intention, to have a second development session just to nail that one?
Yep, that looks like it. Gail, did you want to say anything?
Well done, Andrew. You've taken the words out of my mouth with this suggestion there. When we move on to the risk management paper, we can have this conversation, but on page 35 of mine, what we've actually done there, I don't know how well you've read the paper, but where the risk has been identified, if a score higher than 20, we will be putting in the detail in your reports. However, what we've done with this particular report is I've highlighted the 5 risks that are 20 and above. Now, I don't need to do that, but because we're in this period of reflection and to aid the IJB members, I've given you all that information and the detail. And I've also included the risk profile, the risk matrix, and the strategic risk improvement plan, which should help you in that period of reflection. If we were following our original agreement, what we would be doing there is we would be highlighting the risks that have been revised to a higher score of 20. But we haven't done that. We've given you lots more information just to aid this conversation, Andrew, but we can discuss it at that item. I don't know if that's helpful or not.
Yeah, yes, it is. Yeah.
And that's certainly helpful. I was hoping to get into that conversation at that paper. So let's leave that bit for then. Tony, you'd originally put your hands up for.
Yes, thanks, Chair. It's just, I suppose for me, out of all of these recommendations, for some reason this thing's decided to shrink on me. Just like find the number, but the one on the strategic commissioning plan, I suppose, the formal timetable, and I've now lost it because I went off to the risk report. That for me would be the most. Oh, here we go. So it's page 19, ANOX 21, number 1. That probably is the one that I'd most want to highlight. So that's the one that talks about where we are with the SCP and just having a timeline for that. And by no means are you alone in that. And what I'm talking to clients about at the moment is that obviously we have this focus on the immediate. You know, there is a real risk of people being in like imminent danger, you know, imminent threat of harm. And we absolutely understand that idea that this, and I suppose the balancing risk that we're getting across to everyone, and as I say, this is everywhere, is that longer term we have services where we know the strategic pressures. We know the prioritisation is going to be absolutely required. And the question I asked somewhere else, I wished I hadn't asked, but I did. I said, okay, if you can't do everything on the strategic plan, do we have any areas where, you know, bluntly speaking, the service is going to collapse in 18 months and it's going to take 18 months to fix? And the answer I got, and this was not in Tayside, was rather depressing. It was, that's all of them. But I think, so apart from, you know, my personal mood dropping at that point and deciding not to visit that part of the country very often, there is a real question that says, yeah, we absolutely understand the extreme operational pressures, but there are some things where we know that the demographic pressures, the workforce pressures, all this other stuff will bite us. And I've been saying this for already for a year and a bit. So it is getting closer to the point where those extreme pressures exacerbated by COVID will start to hit us. So it's just keeping an eye on that one. If there were one of those recommendations I would highlight from an internal audit point of view, that would be it. And almost going back to your risk profile, is another aspect of that you know, a risk appetite will both inform that strategic plan, because you'll decide what risks you're willing to take strategically, but also be informed by it, because once you've done your strategic plan, you kind of end up with a different risk profile because your objectives are different, and therefore, and you've had a good old think about what you want to achieve, what could get in the way and what you're doing about it, which by and large is your objectives, risks and controls, stroke actions. So, you know, that for me is the most important one, and the one that if this committee is going to have any, you know, so my, you know, as an internal auditor, out of all of those internal audit ones, some probably aren't as important as we once thought, because frankly the world's a lot riskier than it used to be, and some of the things I used to get quite excited about I maybe don't anymore. Other things become more important, and that's probably the one.
And I think one of the real challenges there is that we don't yet fully know the impact on our business as usual that's been kept back from the system because of COVID, and has still to emerge. I think that is a real challenge. Andrew, your hand's still up. Is that a legacy hand or okay? Sandy.
Thanks, Chair. Tony, worth just noting, there is an update about strategic planning in papers that go to the IJB this afternoon. It's not a comprehensive update, it's just an update. It does actually cross-reference to these previous internal audit recommendations. So we are looking at it, but, you know, we haven't done that task as comprehensively as we would hope. And I think I haven't had a chance to revisit it. I think the expectation is the strategic planning group will come back to some of these issues at the start of the new year.
Just one thing I would say, which might be helpful, because you know I have a range of clients, South Lanarkshire have really moved on with some of this, and they've done some really quite interesting technical work. So there might be bits where, you know, just in, and one of the things was a population needs assessment. They got, what's the new body, Public Health Scotland, to do a population needs assessment. So there might be some interesting stuff. Certainly, you know, as an auditor looking at strategy and all that kind of theoretical stuff, there's some really interesting technical stuff going on, but there might well be some practical things that we could just kind of shortcut just by someone having been through it. And there's always that thing of, if you go first, you know, sometimes you just pick up information along the way that other people can then use. So there might be some benefit in just having a word with the likes of Martin and Craig in South Lanarkshire, because they've already done some of this stuff, and it might just help us, you know, avoid any pitfalls they've had. And if they've picked up any particular tricks along the way, and I've not audited it yet, so I can't tell you whether it's any good or not, but they're certainly kind of further ahead and may well, you know. So in terms of that analysis, and I know they have done because I've talked to them about it, that analysis of some of the pressures that you might, but I hadn't thought of. Oh, well, they're calling the PJ-demic. So they were brilliant at making sure people weren't exposed to COVID by keeping them in there. You know, we'll get food delivered, we'll get stuff delivered to you, we'll bring stuff to your door. And of course, everyone stopped moving, and now they've got all sorts of mobility issues. So that sort of thing they've actually analysed, and they've got some data on, which again, just in terms of them having done the work and things you might want to think about for Angus. I'm sure you would have done that stuff anyway, but it might get you there a bit quicker and a bit easier. So that might be helpful.
That's good to know. And actually, I'm aware of some conversations in Public Health Scotland around some pilot areas for some really interesting stuff that we're looking at. Slightly biased there. Okay, thank you very much. So have we covered off that paper? Can we thank Sandy for that and note the developments and the actions that arise from that conversation? And move on to item 7, which is the governance actions plan, again by Sandy. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So guilty possibly of repeating myself, but I'll pick a couple of highlights in here. Section 4.1.
No, I gave you permission to milk that.
Thank you. Yeah, so section 4.1 just does highlight that we do sometimes make progress on some things despite all the complexities that we're working with. So that is just the changes in the finance function, which is important for us. And then 4.4, I've repeated my notes about the capacity issues that hinder us across the system. But there's still a number of things that we've got stuck in this report. You'll see that it's evident on page 23, 24. I would, though, like to also highlight the very last line on row 23. It's gone to amber, and although it's not gone green yet, it is an issue that's been hanging around for quite some time, and it's about the ability of deploying workforce across the partnership and working with the partners' HR departments in Angus Council and HST side to facilitate change. That is an issue. I'm not sure how long we've been reporting it for, but it's been an issue for IJBs for a long time. Cropped up in the Ministerial Steering Group response, which is where we've got it from 2018-19. We do think there is a window kind of opening for us here. 2 HR departments have been looking at options to develop a workable solution. So it will be really interesting to see how that one fares at our next meeting. But it's a small step, and if we can complete that change, that will be a big step forward for us. So amongst things that we're not managing to do, there are still 1 or 2 things which we are managing to make a wee bit of progress with.
And I just wondered, on the back of that conversation that we've just had, Sandy, would it be possible to look at some dates in that the right-hand coloured column there, potentially to help move things on and focus attention, and I guess that also apply that risk appetite reflection onto some of those things potentially.
Yep, Chair, again, if we can just put that down, the actions, Karen, I'm happy to kind of ask for when I'm getting feedback from the lead officers on these things, kind of an update, timeline expectation.
That'd be brilliant, and I think that might save Andrew a question. Any more questions on that paper from anyone? No, be okay. Thank you very much, Sandy. So that action, and to note the paper. Okay, so if we can move on to item 8 now, which is our external annual audit report, progress report.
Thanks, Chair. I'll pick this up. So at our September meeting, we received our annual report from our external auditors for the year just concluded. I think Mary and Rachel are both on the call today. That report had a number of recommendations in it, and we put down management responses to those recommendations, and this is an update as to where we are with those recommendations. We are obviously a bit closer to September than we would have perhaps been if we'd been looking at these things from August or a bit earlier. So we haven't had quite as much time to work on them, but equally we are continuing to suffer the the capacity issues mentioned already. So this is just an update. We will need to bring an update about these action points back to our April meeting, but I'm happy to take any questions. It's a continuing theme in terms of we have made a bit of progress on some and more to come on others.
Okay, thank you very much, Sandy. Does anyone have any questions for Sandy on that paper? Yes, Peter.
Yeah, just a quick one, Sandy. Particularly point 3, the governance issues about documentation. Are there any sanctions that could be applied to the IJB if we continue not to have our information up to date, particularly the governance side?
Peter, I'm not aware of any particular sanctions. David Thompson might want to come in to comment on that. One of the things, I mean, I've said here, generally, we're looking to develop a kind of a summary document that says, here's all our governance documents, here's where they are published, here's when they were last refreshed. Kind of thing I'd like to put into circulation to this group so that we can see where all the documents like your financial regulations, reserves policies, terms of reference are, for around the committee structure. So that's the intention in terms of eventually developing a list that just says here's where we are with everything that we would potentially share once a year, so people knew how current things were and what needs to be refreshed. But I don't know the answer to your question exactly, Peter. David might have his hand up.
Okay.
He may well do. I see a hand, but I can't see who it's attached to. Is that you, David?
It is, Chair. There are certain legal requirements in respect of the governance documents that the IJB is required to produce. These haven't changed very much since integration first started, and we do keep an eye on what's coming out of the Scottish Government and the Scottish Parliament. So we are up to date on those, and if there is a change that's required, then we would quite quickly put that to the committee, but to the IJB. Sorry. So yes, there are potential legal implications, but as I say, the risk of that is relatively low, and we do keep an eye on legislation and changes and implement these as required, but there hasn't been that many in the last few years.
Okay, thanks, David. I have a technical question before I bring in Catherine there on that same issue, number 3, around the equalities mainstreaming report. Are there additional resources that could be brought in, for example, the Council's Equalities Officer, to help move that along, or is that already the case? Does anyone know? Sandy?
Yeah, I have had a discussion with, I think Vivian Davison, as some of you'll know, was one of the people that lead on this. Vivian's been heavily involved in the integration scheme. We did have backfill for permanent backfill for Vivian doing that work, but that's been one of the posts that's been subject to staff turnover, as has somebody else in that team who also dealt with this. Vivian's just noted to me this was on the 23rd of November, so not that long ago. She is kind of conscious of the need to get something back in front of the IJB, for them to improve. She has wondered if the current mainstreaming report itself is actually relatively fit for purpose for the current financial plan, the current strategic plan. So she isn't thinking it's an enormous piece of work. It's just one of so many things that she has to do. So she was just really trying to deal with the capacity issues. And I think once we've got them sorted, we should be able to get this moving.
Okay, well, it might be then that the Council's Equalities Officer could cast an eye over that to provide some assurance for her, or just to maybe even highlight the extent of what might be required. Catherine.
Thank you. I had a question around the integration scheme and the progress around that. I'm just conscious that in the update it does say that the draft would be approved by the board and the council respectively before it goes to consultation. And I'm conscious that if we're looking at February date, that means that the report on the integration scheme is pretty much due within the next few weeks. And I just wondered whether or not we're confident that that is a timescale that we'll be delivering on. Thanks.
Gail.
Yeah, Catherine, yes, I can update you on that. Vivian Davidson has done a summary one-page document that came out to the chief officers and the 4 chief executives yesterday. The timeline, as you say, Catherine, is problematic at this stage, so we've been asked to review 2 options. The first one would be that we all agree the draft for public consultation by the 21st of January, and that draft could be shared with elected members and board members through a further development session in January, and this would allow and enable public consultation from the 1st to the 15th of February. So that's one option. The second option would require a draft to be agreed by each of the partnerships, and we've all been given dates. The Angus date would be by the 10th of February, with a period of public consultation from the 1st of March to the 15th of March, and a final version for Angus Council meetings taking place in Angus in April. Now, hence, that will mean that we need to advise Scottish Government then of any change for any submission date and the reason for delay. So there is work going on at this moment, so bear with me. I will be able to know the outcome of this in the next few weeks, and if you would be supportive of having a development session in January for this very, very issue, that would be much appreciated. What we have done, Tony, you'll be aware of this as well, but the Tayside Risk Management Project Group, the one I was alluding to earlier, chaired by Dave Berry, we've agreed for the integration scheme, the wording, and what that will say, I think, is the statutory partners and the IJB board have agreed a risk management strategy to the integration joint boards, and there's a document will go on the website. So that's progress in itself, a Tayside-wide agreement there. Tony, I think you've assisted with the wording, as has Hilary Walker on that. Vivian, as I say, striving really hard to try and get all this, but it's very complex when you've got 3 IJBs and councils and NHS Tayside. So it's proving difficult.
Okay, appreciate that update, Gail. Thanks very much. With that, can we note that paper and ask for, we're being asked for a report to the next audit committee meeting as well. So thank you very much for that. And moving on.
Can I ask if you would be supportive of having a development session?
Oh, yeah. Yes, sorry. Yes, I would certainly. I'm seeing nods around the table. Yes, thank you very much. And our next agenda item is a verbal update from Rachel, I think. Just trying to find my page on the papers. Is that correct? Verbal update?
Yes, indeed. That is the plan. Hopefully you can hear me.
I can see you now as well. Hello.
Hello.
It's lovely to see you.
It's good to be here. Yes, normally you would be seeing our annual audit plan at this meeting in a normal year, but it's not a normal year for any of us, and Audit Scotland is affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. We're all momentarily. So as you will have observed from your last audit committee, our audits are taking longer, and I've only just completed the final 2020-21 audit as of yesterday. So we are now looking to planning for the 21-22 audit year. So the proposal is that I will agree a draft plan with the Chief Officer and the Chief Finance Officer. It will be after Christmas, and that would then be circulated to audit committee members, because obviously some of our audit work will have progressed by the time of the next audit committee, so that you have sight of that by email before the next audit committee, and you can formally confirm in April that you've seen it and are content with it. At the moment, we are looking at how Audit Scotland recovers some of the time it's taking to complete audits to try and bring forward some of the deadlines. But as of today, I can't give you any certainty on that. I'm sure you'll be options for bringing, and I would hope that the annual audit plan would have some suggested dates that I will agree with due course. I am aware this is the last year of audit appointments, so we'd hope to be closing off some of our recommendations in the coming year's audit. I'm also aware that the audit fees, the proposed audit fees for this year have just been emailed out, so that should be arriving in Sandy's inbox any minute now. And the base fee is just about £28,000 for next year, but I'll discuss that and have Chief Officer and Chief Finance Officer due course. I would also want to bring to your attention there is a best value audit of Angus Council just starting now. It will be published in June of next year, and one of the areas of focus for that is partnership and collaboration. So I expect there will be some engagement with the IJB on that from the best value audit team. Obviously, council members and the IJB will be kept informed. I'll be in touch with.
Rachel, your audio is dropping out quite a bit, actually.
I'm sorry, it's a new laptop and new headset, so the volume's a bit dubious. So it was just to say, I don't know how much of that you caught. That we'll keep in touch on best value coverage of partnership and collaboration with other agencies. If anyone has any questions on timing of the audit plan or anything about the audit process, I'm happy to answer that just now.
Okay, does anyone have any questions for Rachel? No, you're fine. I've already been involved in early conversations around the best value audit for Angus Council, which was quite interesting. Obviously, it's the first time I've been involved in that. It was a good start. I think Carol's got plenty to work with. My only question really for you, Rachel, is around, I guess, Audit Scotland's staffing complement. I know I've been finding people have been moving around the system quite a bit. Do you have the capacity that you're needing at Audit Scotland to not just hit the Angus audits, but nationally?
We've had some recent recruitment, and yes, there's quite a lot of movement, and recent recruitment means some more movement within the ranks. We have had some external people come in. I couldn't name numbers as of right now, because obviously if we say promote somebody internally, that does not increase our overall complement, but we have recruited some additional people. So personally, I am hopeful that we can bring some of our deadlines forward. The plan is that the Angus IJB audit team will be the same as it was last year. Carol will continue to be your appointed auditor. I'll be managing it, and Mary will be leading on the day-to-day work. So hopefully things will be looking up in the coming year.
That's great. Thanks very much, and we'll look forward to that email coming out with the draft. And I would ask everyone to respond to that when that comes in. Thank you very much, Rachel. Okay, if we can now move on to item 10, which is the IJB Audit Committee Working Arrangements report by Sandy.
Yep, thanks, Chair. I don't normally put together a paper under this header, but there are a few different things that were floating about, and I thought it's probably best just to bring them all under one item for a series of slightly different discussions about different things. I actually wrote section 3.1 of the report before I really realised that the reappointment of the chair and vice chair would have to go at the top of the agenda. So to some extent, that has kind of been overtaken by dealing with that matter at the top of the agenda. We do note that Peter is here for his first meeting, so that was helpful to have that relatively recent appointment at the IJB recently. So 3.1 is dealt with. 3.2 was with reference to something that's in our annual work plan. And in our annual work plan, it asks us as a group to review our terms of reference, or our constitutional arrangements, on a once-a-year basis. Now, my anticipation is this would have happened at a development session that theoretically would have happened in October. That clearly hasn't happened. At the moment, we're not making any recommendations about changes in terms of references. So if the IJB's audit committee members here today felt that they were comfortable with the terms of references that we have right now, we can reapprove them today and we can revisit them in due course in another year's time. It will stay on our annual cycle of things to look at. So that would be the first point to go through. I think, Chair, it's probably best we deal with these points individually rather than talk about the whole paper, because each thing is quite different.
Okay, Catherine's got her hand up first.
Thanks. I just wanted to come in and say it feels like yesterday when we looked at them the last time, so I am quite happy with that suggestion that we approve again today and roll it forward.
Thanks, Catherine.
Okay. I just wanted to check where that ambition to review annually came from. Was it a self-imposed? And might that be something that we have an appetite to reduce?
Yeah, because Chair, I can reply to that. So it wasn't so much a case of rewriting these; it was more a case of making sure they were in front of people, so that as the audit committee membership changes, people were always going to see it at some point relatively soon. What we did is we put it on our annual work plan, and every year in our annual work plan it says in December, reapprove the chair, the vice chair, reapprove the terms and conditions. So it's not really a case of having to rewrite them or anything like that. But it's just there in the annual work plan to reference as a stopping off point. If we can just go by and we're happy, we move on, great. But that's where it's come from. It's from our own chosen annual work plan.
Okie doke. Thanks, Tony.
Hopefully I've come in at the right point, and in some ways you could argue I'm quite late. Looking at the remit again, there was a couple of bits that struck me. One is the remit would normally include provision for private discussion with internal and external auditors at least once a year. I've probably said that before somewhere and possibly in Angus, but that might be something to consider. The other one, and I can't imagine why I haven't noticed this before, but I just noticed that, and this is nothing against Catherine, so it's not a personal comment, but certainly in the NHS and within the NHS guidance, you wouldn't normally have an officer on the audit committee, because the audit committee is kind of that independent scrutiny. So whilst Catherine's expertise and knowledge, has always been very valuable to this committee, and that may well be something that you would want to continue. Quite often, so in the health board, if you notice, and I think it's the same in the council as well, the scrutiny committee is just, when the health will be non-execs and the council will be councillors. So it's not people who actually do the work, because the point of the audit committee is that it's independent and it looks at things. So whilst again, and I would say it again, Catherine's analysis and input is really a valuable asset to this committee, you may want to consider whether actually it should just be restricted to people who don't actually work for the IJB/HSCB. And that's just something, there is guidance on audit committees generally, which I could play in. So it's definitely nothing about people, it's about principle. And apologies, because I should have spotted that before and I haven't, but that's the thing with being an auditor. Sometimes when you spot something, you just have to kind of point that out. So it's up to you as a committee what you do, but that might be something you think about, but also then how you would make sure you retain that expertise and input. But at the end of the day, it's your decision.
Okay, thanks. I think Catherine wants to come in on that.
Thank you. Just for clarity, I'm not an officer of the Health and Social Care Partnership, and I sit on the IJB as a member rather than an advisor to the IJB, whilst I'm not a voting member. And the reason that I am on the audit committee is because we had explored exactly this tension when Sandy was really keen for people to step forward, and I said, I was quite prepared to sit on the audit committee, but I wasn't clear whether or not that was appropriate. But apparently it is within the rules of the IJB and the audit committee. So perhaps what we're raising here is a question about whether or not those rules need to be changed for clarity, because I'm conscious that I don't think another colleague with a similar kind of role from NHS Tayside has been on the audit committee. So it might be worthwhile doing a wee read through and just double checking again whether or not this is a suitable arrangement and under the rules as they stand, and then whether or not we want to change them, which is a different matter. Myself, on a personal basis, I have no particular view one way or the other. So happy to go with the majority.
Okay, I just wonder if that is something that David could help with, but I certainly wouldn't want to lose Catherine from sitting around this table. Sandy, and then we've got other questions coming in. It's okay, I see you guys.
Yeah, I mean, I know David's put his hand up there. I just wonder, we maybe take comments today, and then we can reflect back on where we are. So, we've obviously got Tony's comment, Catherine's comment, and we've got probably other comments coming in, and then maybe we can have a chat with David, after the event, rather than make any active decisions today.
I think Tony's point about access, having a private meeting with the auditors, I mean, that happened in practice this year anyway, so that I think just adding that in would be helpful. So there was Peter first and then Andrew.
Actually, David's got his hand up. I don't know if he wants to finish off.
Sorry, you're right, he does. David.
Thank you, Chair. I position, but there is no restrictions on who can and who cannot sit on the audit committee now. I think this may be in the regulations, but certainly the chief officer and the chief finance officer are members of the IJB, but they're non-voting members. But we took a decision that they couldn't be members of the audit committee, but they were expected to attend. As I say, the Catherine's not well, she's required to be a member of the IJB in her post as Chief Social Work Officer, but Catherine's also subject to the Code of Conduct for devolved public bodies in terms of the Standards Commission. So as I say, we will look into it. I would also say that if what Tony's saying is correct, then we would need to apply that to the primary care representative, the nursing representative, the non-primary care representative as well, and I think Alison Clement, who's also a board member. So it would quite significantly restrict the pool of individuals that could attend the audit committee. So I would, support Sandy's comments that we can have a discussion and we can reflect on it and maybe report back to a future audit committee. And Chair, I'm afraid I'm going to have to leave the meeting just now, which is quite frustrating because you're probably going to need my advice in respect to this matter. I need to get to Angus House to sign documents so that I can get back home for the IJB at 2 o'clock. So I do apologise.
That's okay. Although I'm in Angus House, you could easily log on here. Right.
Chair, it's Gail here. Can I have a word? David, I've just seen your email for this afternoon, so I'm comfortable with you approaching Emma Jane.
So thanks, Gail. I'll do that now.
Okay. Thanks very much. Thanks, David.
Bye,
and bye. And Andrew, I think Peter, did you? Oh, no, it was Peter. Sorry.
Yeah,
Peter first and then Andrew.
Me first. Two things. One is I would rather change the rules than change Catherine. That's my comment. The other thing is I'm wondering whether, coming back to the original report that Sandy was talking to, whether it's an opportunity to roll 3.2, which is a review of terms of reference, into 3.3 if we have another session early in the new year. And just spend 10 minutes saying, have you read them? Do we want to have a quick debate about them, rather than have a separate session or whatever?
I think that's a thumbs up. And Andrew.
Very quick question. We're the auditors of the internal governance procedures. I'm just wondering who audits the auditors. Can we self-reflect sometime to see if we're actually carrying out our job correctly, or is that a function, or are we independent of that sort of thing?
I think we've been doing a degree of self-assessment. I think that would, and I know, you know, from the Scrutiny and Audit Committee on Angus Council, we do an annual self-assessment, which is facilitated by our internal auditor.
Oh, right. Realise we'd done that. Anyway, okay.
Tony, do you want to come in?
Yeah, it's a couple of bits. One for technical thing. I mean, what you can have people as attendees, not voting members. So that's a perfectly sensible thing to do if you want to retain expertise, which, my personal view would be a good idea. Now, whether Catherine wants to, I'm sure she's got many presses on her time, but I think it is useful to have that expertise at this particular committee. So it's not about that, it's about voting. Now, I'm going to be absolutely honest here. I'm very, very well versed with the health side of things and various bits of guidance around. I'm going to be absolutely honest, the SIP for guidance and SIP for a very particular body, they'll charge you 150 quid for the guidance, and I've never felt the urge to spend 150 quid on the guidance. Catherine, my opposite number in the council, will be able to give you the exact ruling. So this isn't about IJB guidance. There's nothing to do with that. It's about best practice for audit committees, and obviously that's something you would want to comply with. I'm quite happy to go off and talk to Catherine, or indeed one of my many other colleagues, presumably all or some of whom has stumped up 150 quid for that particular piece of guidance, and come back with the relevant passage. And that would be helpful, I think. So is that distinction between having someone who you can require or ask to be there as an attendee? The other thing, I suppose, I was at an audit committee yesterday and someone was leaving and saying how wonderful they found the audit committee. So if you're short of members, you could always proselytise and tell them what a fascinating and marvellous experience it is. The other thing is we've got something, so there's Annex F of the Audit Committee Handbook, which applies to health. It doesn't apply to your body, but it is quite good. So there is Annex F. I'll quite happily share with you. It's quite long. You may not want all of it, but it is good. It's good stuff. It allows, and you can actually tie that in with a development event where you don't just sit there and tick a few boxes. You actually think about what it means and what a no might mean, or a yes, but we could do better in a more reflective environment rather than just kind of banging through because you have to. So I quite happily share that with Sandy. But it's quite a decent document. And again, I'm sure SIP will have a similar document. You just have to splash the cash to pay for it. But I'll ask if I can get hold of a copy of that as well from my local authority colleagues without in any way breaking copyright.
Thanks, Tony. Sandy, you want to come in there?
Yeah, sorry, I am monitoring my blood pressure on my phone at the moment, and we're talking about lots of things that we're committing ourselves to, and reviews and documents. And bear in mind, many times in these papers and in what we've spoken about today, we have spoken about capacity issues. In no way do I want to say we won't do things that we're required to for governance purposes, but we just need to keep in mind the capacity to actually deal with all these different things. Anyway, that said, we'll certainly take on board all the individual feedback, and we'll have a chat with David. Now, depending on what we do with item 3.3 in a second, we will bring it back, this particular point, back to the next audit committee in one shape or other.
And also remember, you know, our papers go to the full IJB. So I guess there's a bit of a two-way communication loop going on there. I think we would quickly hear from our internal, external auditors and the IJB if they felt we weren't doing our job appropriately. Would that be fair? Nod, Tony, just nod.
Slightly leading question, but yes, that is actually correct. And on Sandy's point, I'd quite happily help on that one. There's certain bits I can do, certain bits I can't. Providing advice I can do, kind of doing stuff that's an official decision I can. So that side, I'm quite happy to pick up, gathering the advice, you know, the questionnaires, putting it in front. You make the decision, but I'm quite happy to go out and do a bit of digging, as long as I don't have to spend health board money on SIPFA, which I frankly resent, in case you haven't.
Yeah, we picked up that sense from you there, Tony. Thank you very much. Andrew, your hand's still up. Did you want to come back in?
No, I forgot to take it down. Sorry. Chair.
Okay, that's fine. Right, so that for item 10 there, we've covered off, I think, item 1 under the recommendations. So we've appointed a chair and a vice chair. Sorry, yeah.
Sorry, Rachel Brown's still got her hand up. I'm not too sure if she's wanting to come in or if it's a legacy hand.
Well done, well spotted.
Thank you.
Rachel.
Thanks, Chair. It was just very quickly to say I can offer comments to Sandy around audit committee membership and the local government side of things, if that would be helpful. But I'll do that outside the committee. Thanks.
Super. Thank you very much. Okay. So I'll just go through the rest of these recommendations, if that's okay. So nod, and I'm sure Karen I'll pick that up. So number 2 is note support for the existing IJB Audit Committee's constitutional arrangements. Number 3, notes and considers next steps with respect to the Audit Committee's annual development session. Note the constraints with regard to progressing governance improvement, etc. And item 5, consider the need for direction sections of future Audit Committee reports. And in fact, we hadn't covered that off, but Sandy and I had mentioned that earlier, the view being that we don't actually give directions. So the suggestion was that section of our report is surplus to requirements and could come off. Sandy, did you want to say anything to that?
No, Julie, I don't think so in terms of directions, because the evidence has been over the last year we've not issued directions from the Audit Committee, and that is a logical thing for us as an Audit Committee to do, because the Audit Committee deals with matters that are inside the IJB rather than things that we need to generally direct Angus Council or NHS Tayside to do. There will occasionally be exceptions, but of course in those exceptional circumstances we can include that section. But I was just wanting to, just gradually take out content of papers that was just, surplus to requirements.
Okay. Well, I'm certainly happy to do that if everyone else is, with the understanding that if any direction is required, then that can be added in. Yes, thank you. Hayley's thumb going there. That's marvellous. Thanks very much, everyone. And moving on to item 11 and the risk management mid-year update. And before we start, Gail, I would just like to say that I really like the look of this report, how it's laid out. I really like it, and I think it will lend itself well when we get to the place where we can add in the risk appetite, and that was something that I had wanted to say prior to our previous conversation around risk appetite. So over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. As you're aware already, the risk management strategy was previously approved by you all. So the Tayside group continues to work on progressing risk across Tayside. From an Angus IJB perspective, the Audit Committee will meet twice a year and consider the risks here. The Angus Clinical Care and Professional Governance Risk Group consider all of our key risks. Now, they've met conveniently on the 15th of November, hence you've got a really robust update here and very timelessly. Now, as I said earlier, the process in place is around exception reporting, around any new risks, and that intention would be to score where the scores are over 20 or where the risk has increased to over 20, we will report that direct to the Audit Committee. However, because we're in the process of determining our risk appetite and everything else, you've got a very detailed report in front of you. So if we can just talk you through the 5 key risks. Now, again, there's a lot of detail, so I'm not going to read all of these out. But the 5 key risks: sustainability of primary care services. Now, that is a significant big risk across Tayside, and that risk continues to be scored at 25. And you'll see the causes in there and the intentions and the plan. Tomorrow should have been the Tayside Risk Management Committee, and Gail McClure, who's the audit person for primary care, was going to NHS Tayside to discuss that risk further. The second one we've got is our workforce optimisation. Now, again, there's a risk that in Angus, the Health and Social Care Partnership will be unable to develop and sustain our workforce to meet our legal obligations. I'm sure you've all either seen the Courier or read the Courier or heard about the article that was in the press last week, which was actually highlighting our challenges with our workforce and meeting particularly our care at home demands and the increased number of people that are requiring care at home and the challenges that we're having with our workforce. George Bowie chairs our workforce group. We have a specific workforce group in place and he chairs the group, and that group has met on a couple of occasions now to actually look at that, and the improvement actions have been identified in relation to this. But please don't underestimate the challenges here with workforce. So hence, we're keeping that as read as well. The third one, is the Commission service provider failure. And this risk has previously increased from a previous score of 16 to 20. And that also was in relation to the recruitment and retention of our staff, again, particularly with our care at home service. And I've provided a lot of detail for you there that you might not need, but I think it's important that this first meeting, when we're looking at determining our risk appetite, that you've got that level of information at this stage rather than me speaking it all out loud. The other one, the fourth one, is, I think I'm on 4 here, am I? The implementation of the strategic plan priorities. And as we've highlighted already, there have been delays in the implementation of the Angus strategic plan. So the risk has been revised to a higher score of 20 there. And that risk is around meeting parts of the Angus strategic commissioning plan. And that particular area is around the emphasis on prevention, early intervention, self-care, and community interventions to prevent and avoid unnecessary hospital admissions where we can. So that risk continues to be revised, and we've also got our remobilisation plans in place, and that is also considered through the Angus Strategic Planning Group. Also, more recently, I've identified an opportunity that we're working alongside Angus Council, and we've prepared a combined bid with Angus Alive and Angus Council and ourselves in partnership. Now, there's an exciting opportunity to ensure that we provide a public health approach to strategic planning priorities there. So there has been funding approved for that, and there are opportunities to provide much more evidence-based interventions to improve physical health and reduce inequalities. It's at a very early stage, but our clinical director, Alison Clement, is heavily involved in this, along with the Chief Executive of Angus Alive and a number of others. So I've just highlighted that for information because that's an exciting Chair. You will also hear about this through Angus Council work as well, who supported funding for that. Risk appetite, we've already alluded to that, so I won't go over all that, but attached for all your information is the risk profile, the risk rating matrix, and the strategic risk improvement plan. So I think that's enough there, unless you've got any questions on any of that detail. Peter? Oh, sorry, Chair.
It's all right. You're just quicker getting there than I could get my mic off, Gail. Thank you. So Peter Davidson and Peter Burke, please.
Thanks, Gail. Gail, can I just thank you for the paper too, to echo Julie's thoughts. I think it's a wonderful paper. And I think that my lack of questions in my first meeting up to this point is reflective of the quality of all of the papers. So I just want to commend all of what we've read. I've picked the darkest room in my house. I hope you can see me. I'm trying to get as far away from the tradesmen that are in, putting a new bathroom. It's very noisy, so the banging you may hear is that. I understand the role of us in audit and risk is not to delve down on each individual risk at any point, but just assure ourselves that the executive team are coping with the management, and I do get assurance from that. But if you don't mind, I am going to delve into one particular risk, and it's not one of the 5 highlighted, and it was the prescription management. Obviously, in the NHS Audit and Risk Committee, we refer to it as effective prescribing. Now, it mentions that the overspend on prescribing remains the single most significant cost pressure. Now, I have a question probably for yourself and Sandy around who sets that budget, because I'm relatively new here. So who sets that budget? Is it a national setting of that budget per head of population type thing, or is it localised to local need? Because where we call it effective prescribing, I would suggest that just because we're overspending, does that suggest we are prescribing ineffectively, or are we just meeting the demands of our local population at this minute in time, and whether or not that budget needs to be tweaked, considering that we have an underspend anyway? So that's my first question or my first point. And my second one is just something very minor, Gail, page 39, SRO3, financial management and the risk exposure for November 21. Is REDAR a typo, or is this a new kind of rating? It's not red, it's redder. But again, a very minor point, I appreciate. That's me.
Oh, you're very smart. You're very smart.
I know.
Apologies, group, for the radar. You're very observant, Peter. I'm going to hand over to Sandy about the prescribing, because it is a sense of frustration for all of us, Peter. Sandy, I'll let you answer that.
Yeah, thanks, Gail. Thanks, Peter. So in terms of your prescribing resources, what we are, I think, let me just kind of describe the position regarding prescribing generally. Generally, we are just a bit concerned. I think this was in an IJB paper at the last meeting, or maybe it's this afternoon. I can't remember. It's one or the other. But we've provided a prescribing update relatively recently to the IJB, and we are just a bit concerned about. We saw a long-term improvement from about 2018 to 2020, so over a 2 or 3 year period, and that brought us right back into the national pack. Historically, Angus was an outlier. Can't remember the numbers. At one point we were 12, 13, 14% above the national average. Probably best I didn't say that out loud in a public meeting, but certainly over 10% above the national average. We got ourselves right back into the national pack. We were never at the national average, Peter. We were always a number of percents above that. So we always recognised, even though we'd had a good spell in terms of stabilising our prescribing position, that we weren't necessarily going to run at the national average. Possibly a reflection of our geography, and which in turn is a reflection of the balance of care and how people access services, so maybe more inclined to have more medicines at home than be reliant on other types of services. So we always knew we weren't going to come to a national average. So what we're kind of flagging up is there is, having got down and stabilised, we're now seeing a drift away a wee bit from the national averages, which of course then raises a different set of questions. So if we'd stabilised at one level, why might we drift away? That can't be a change in our, let's say, geographic characteristic, because that's stable. But there may be other things going on. So that's why we're a bit concerned. And we also know that prescribing is a big ship that takes quite a long time to turn around and requires a lot of different types of interventions to keep it in the right place. So that's why we'd be particularly keen to highlight it as an ongoing risk, but also increase the risk measure associated with that. The funding associated with prescribing, we do to a large extent now determine our own budgets, so we have to make the resource decisions in our own environment. We will revisit the level of our prescribing budget on an annual basis as part of our own budget setting. We will formalise that in April, but I hope to have a draft paper to the IJB in February. Historically, and I'm now going back to when we were set up as an IJB in 2016, we did feel we were underfunded regarding prescribing, not uniquely in Tayside. However, I think we'd have to accept we have now moved on from that, and we are working with the overall budgets that we have. So there's only a small element of legacy there. I think we're really saying we are looking to manage our prescribing budgets, our prescribing costs within our overall devolved resource now. Hopefully that gives you a bit of background about how we set the budgets, but also why there's that concern about the drift away, or more to the point, further away from the national average, because we never quite came to it. So that's how we're trying to keep an eye on it. Does that kind of feel, that makes sense?
Really helpful. Thank you,
Okay.
Sandy. Thanks, Gail, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Could I abuse my chair's position at the moment and come in with a follow-up on that around, I guess, the impact of social prescribing and whether there's scope to do more on that might help the overarching prescribing budget?
Yes, I think we will see that as maybe one part of a number of things that develop over a period of time, Chair. There's nothing that inhibits us doing things like that from a financial management perspective. We choose to do more at a different place in a pathway. We can absolutely do that. So that's something that we might see pop up a bit more through some of our preventative work. Gail mentioned things like that about 5 minutes ago. And if that's something that becomes more of a feature of our landscape, it would filter into our prescribing plans and all our other plans in due course. But there's no kind of structural inhibition to that. It's about the choices we make in terms of balancing everything across the best part of £200 million a year.
Okay, thanks. And there's some interesting information out there around the use of green space and physical activity. A tripartite report through Public Health Scotland also noted that in the second lockdown, physical activity in nature dipped, and it was an inequalities issue, and women were particularly impacted as well. You know, that their use of green space and the use of physical activity outside reduced in the second lockdown, and it's just some interesting emerging data around that. Peter, I do apologise. It's you next.
That's Gail.
Thank you, Peter. Yes, Chair, I was going to say the Angus Alive bid, actually, you're probably at an advantage where you will have more of that evidence base. So it may be very helpful for you to link in with our progress regarding the project from your knowledge from the public health side. Thank you.
Will do, thanks. Peter.
Finally, first of all, I'd like to echo Peter's comments about the value of this paper as well as other papers. But this one I find particularly interesting, and it comes back to what Andrew was saying, what Tony was saying way back when, in terms of managing our risk and identifying our risk appetite. I think it's great in that regard. I remember asking Sandy some years ago now about SR11, service provider failure. Now I see that it says that there is weekly monitoring. If this was a bank we were looking at, there would be particular stress tests which they would have to meet and supersede. Is there any form of either national or local stress testing for the care providers, or is it just a sort of warm feeling that they're doing okay?
Sandy, yep. Oh,
I'll let Gail answer.
Okay.
Yeah, no, Sandy will maybe know more than me, but I'm not aware, Peter, of any national stress test. George Bowie would be the one to be able to answer that, but I'm not aware of any national one. Okay,
it might be Ivan could be helpful on that as well. I had a question on that. I just noticed Tony's hand ping up there, but on page 34 in the bullet points, the indirect impact of COVID-19, and it gave a few for examples. One of my concerns is around a delay in people coming forward if they have any concerns potentially around cancer diagnosis and any hidden impact. You know, that's something that is building up behind the scenes, and I know in Public Health Scotland we're concerned around the, you know, what people might be keeping to themselves at this stage, and we're really encouraging people to go forward to their GPs to seek assurance or the appropriate diagnosis or diagnostic tests, and to not delay on those. Are you aware of any concerns locally?
Yeah, no, Chair. We're actively encouraging that as well. Alison Clement, as the clinical director, would say that they are absolutely cited on this in general practice.
Thank you very much. And Tony now.
You're muted.
Oh, sorry, I was muted. I was just going to say I was going to defer to Peter first, as he's a member, and I'm just a hanger on.
Thank you. I did have another couple of points.
Okay.
I was a bit concerned that we said on point 4 there were no financial implications. When I look at this, there's a risk of GPs, so presumably needing locums. There's a risk of funding care at home. There's a risk of prescribing management costs. And yet you say there are no financial implications. I find that a slightly worrying statement to make.
Sandy,
Okay,
we'll
yeah.
want to answer that.
No, Peter, it's a fair comment, but I think what we're kind of saying, I'm looking at the words here, there are no financial implications arising from this report itself. We're not saying here's a new decision being made or here's a new thing. So these things are all already reflected in the financial planning report. So they're all kind of, they're documented. You know, do you remember, well, you know anyway, I'm sure it's ingrained in your brain. The financial reports that you see every couple of months, they have a whole page of risks. So we're flagging all the risks up there. And what we're kind of saying is there's nothing new or extra that's coming out of here, because we're trying to pick those things all up elsewhere. So you're right, every risk has a financial implication, and it would almost, if I start to try and document them in this report as well, it would almost overwhelm this report. So we do try and put them in the finance reports and kind of let people really give a more I suppose almost a non-financial take on all the other aspects of the risk. But so the way I'm kind of justifying my reply to you is there's nothing new kind of coming out, but they're all captured already in the finance reports. Hope that kind of makes sense.
Okay.
Thanks though for asking that, Peter. Tony, do you want to come in there?
Yeah, I think there was one thing about the risks associated with the whole kind of COVID thing. That's something we've recommended specifically from the NHS Tayside perspective, that they need to capture better in their risk management process. And that would obviously need to include some of the IJB aspects as well. And we have, some of the work I did with self-managed, some of the work I've done with Forth Valley Health Board, they have been kind of delineating some of the very specific aspects. And in terms of the IJB, there are particular things. So just the fact that elective surgery is so delayed has an impact on you, because people are wandering around with conditions that haven't been treated. They're going to need your services more. When they do eventually get the operation, they're going to come out in a worse state, needing more physio support, whatever. And then you have the whole thing of people maybe not going to GPs and therefore not being on that list and not identified, and the whole delay in cancer services and all sorts of other things. And indeed some child, picked up elsewhere, there's some child, if you're not doing eye tests in children under the age of 6, things that could have been prevented aren't, and then you've got a problem for the rest of your life because they've gone blind. Well, obviously they have the biggest problem, but from yours perspective, so it picks up on Sands. All of a sudden, for Sandy's perspective, we're having to pay for all sorts of things that we wouldn't have had to pay for if we'd have fixed their eyesight. From their point of view, it's a horrible outcome. From us, it's not a good outcome, and we will have to intervene a lot more in future. So there's a whole range of that stuff, and the health board should be picking that up. Certainly that's a point we've raised. I don't know from the council side whether that's something the council has picked up as well in their risk register, but it's definitely something, and we've actually shared some information with the health board from elsewhere, where people have picked up some stuff, and frankly, some of it's quite scary. So that risk should be being picked up from the health board perspective. I'm not sure how much progress they've made, but they certainly should be, and that should then be able to feed into your risk analysis. The only other thing very quickly in terms of inequalities, there's some interesting guidance coming out to health boards. I suspect analogous guidance will have come out to councils, and whereas quite rightly you've identified as a body the need to really make inequalities more central to your strategic planning, that's actually now a formal requirement. So certainly for 2/3 of your activity, which is the health board side, that is now a legal requirement. If you make any strategic changes, you will have to demonstrate that you're complying with the inequalities guidance. And I'm pretty sure there'll be something analogous for councils, because that seems to be a big push, quite rightly, post-COVID. So that will I think some of these things, it's quite right that you want to do them, but you're going to have to do them anyway. And there will be a very specific context on that, in terms of these legal requirements, which are quite interesting and quite a welcome development. But yeah, so that's just information.
Thank you very much, Tony. And there's some interesting legislation going to be coming through this Parliament around community wealth building, and it is very much envisaged that anchor institutions like ourselves will have a significant role in that, alongside obviously, you know, our community planning partnerships with our other strategic partners and the third sector, which is actually, I find, quite exciting. Peter, if you would like to come in.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just one final comment on page 38, SR 17, incorrect patient contact details on Ad Astra. If we're still using Ad Astra for out of hours, why has that been archived, or is it just history?
Jill will be able to answer that, Chair.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Thanks, Peter. So we do still use Ad Astra, Peter. It's a national system. So the reason it's been archived is because all of the actions that we can take locally have been taken. The outstanding issues are national issues that the National Advance team are working on. But we've got everything that we can do locally in place to mitigate the risk associated with that.
Okay, thanks, Jill.
That I have to say that section gave me flashbacks to my NHS 24 days. Thanks for that. Tony.
Sorry, very quickly, Joe. I'm not even sure that's actually an IJB. It's only when I was discussing with Gail, when we're getting ready for the appetite stuff, I'm not sure that's actually an IJB risk as opposed to a provider risk, because they hold that information. They are the data owner in that context. So, you know, it's not really a direct risk for the IJB or a strategic risk for the IJB. It's definitely something that you need to know that the providers are doing. But in terms of your risks, the risk falls with the provider, and that's reasonably clear in that context.
But the risk falls on the patient.
Okay, that's...
Sorry, I jumped in. Doesn't the risk fall on the patient? And isn't the patient our responsibility?
No, not directly. That's the answer. But it's directly, and then there's a whole ream of stuff. And if you're interested, I could share the stuff we finally got from the Scottish Government. The people with ultimate responsibility for that risk are the Council and the Health Board. And then in that case, I think it's the Council. You do have a duty to make sure your patients are safeguarded, but it's kind of part of a wider thing. It's not your direct risk. Basically, if it goes wrong, it's, I think on that one, it's the provider that cops for it, and they would have the ICO investigation. So yes, you have a broader perspective to make sure your patients are looked after, and if something goes wrong, you know, your providers, you have to make sure that through directions and through assurance that they're doing the right things. But it's not a direct risk for you. It'd be part of this overall clinical and care risk.
Okay, so I actually would have thought that the key partner in that would be the Health Board for the out of hours arrangements, but I see Gillian's got her hand up.
Thanks, Chair. I think one thing just to give assurances, although it's archived from this, it's still there as a service. So the service are continuing to monitor that, so that we do still hold that as a service risk within out of hours. It probably, in terms of who holds it, it probably is from an NHS Tayside perspective, as the parent organisation.
Yeah.
So it has gone through the strategic risk management route that Gail's alluded to before. So they are aware of it, but we will continue to monitor it as a service risk going forward. And should anything change, then we regularly discuss the service risks through CCPG as well. Anyway, so we'll pick it up. It won't fall through the net.
Thank you, Gillian. Does that
you.
give you assurance, Peter?
Yes, I'm still a bit concerned about the headline in the Courier, but and we can handle that as and when, I guess.
Okay, thanks very much. And I think I'm not seeing any hands, so can we note the strategic risk profile and matrix, etc., Note that we are required to develop local risk priorities, and our conversation today has covered that off quite significantly. And we note progress made in relation to the internal audit review of risk management, and also to congratulate Gail and her team on that paper and the way that's emerging. I think it is a really helpful piece of work, and I'm grateful for it. So if everyone's happy with that, then we can then move on to the, oh, Sandy's got his hand up.
Sorry, Chair, I'll let you finish that sentence.
I was just moving on to the final item for the date of the next meeting.
Right, can I maybe just interject before that? Could we maybe please go back to item 10, section 3.3 on page 30?
Yes.
And that's where we were talking about, do we want to have a development session in February or not? Because the actual recommendation didn't say we do or don't, we just said we'd have a discussion about it. And if we do want to have a development session, is there a couple of items that people would like us to focus on?
Yes, I think we were talking about, I think there is an appetite to have a development session. Yes. People happy with that? And we're potentially going to look at maybe a touch base on the risk appetite for that as well. Andrew, sorry.
I think Sandy was looking for ideas for the. Is that correct, Sandy?
Yes, a wee bit.
I'll go back to my original point: is how do we assess whether we are doing a good job or not? I'm still not convinced I've answered that one.
I had thought also that we had agreed that we would look at induction materials, particularly in relation to perhaps a turnover in May.
That was in it as well, but what was that another? Yeah, I don't know.
Yes, so some of these issues we will have to deal with anyway, and we wouldn't necessarily need to deal with them inside an audit committee development session. But what I can definitely do is I can take that list of actions. We can schedule a meeting, development session. What we'll try and do is we'll maybe do it for a couple of hours before the February IJB meeting. So it would be a normal kind of audit time slot. Andrew, we absolutely can look at the self-evaluation stuff. That is something we have looked at before, but I suspect it's maybe 2019 when we did it. So we can have another look at that kind of thing. And also we can, obviously we can deal with the terms of reference issue or the constitutional issue. If there's something we can helpfully bring to the development session about either risk appetite or induction, we can do, but they may have lives of their own anyway that are IJB wide. Does that give us a good start?
Yeah, I was trying to think back to when we were looking at self-assessment, and it was definitely pre-COVID. So that, yeah, okay, right. Thank you. You've got enough to be going on there. Okay, so item last is the date of our next meeting, which is April the 20th, 2022 at 11:30 a.m. That will be a significant one. And I'd just like to thank everyone for their attendance and for their engagement in today's meeting. And I wish you all well. I see Gail's hands up now. Get in quick, Gail.
Sorry, it was just a final point for Karen. Karen, I know on the front page of the paper, I'm still down as interim.
Oh, well spotted.
But actually, I got a letter this week confirming the extension of my interim post. I did.
Oh.
So I'm now beginning to worry that I'm really in a permanent post now.
Oh, that's. I'm sure.
Apologies, Gail. I picked it up on the main letter. I completely missed that one. I will change it post meeting.
I've got a letter here, and I thought, what? Anyway, I'm having a wee smile to myself.
I would just take the two salaries, Gail.
I didn't hear that. Okay, thank you, everyone. I'll see you at 2 o'clock. Take care. Bye.